Hello and welcome to the Research into Practice video series. The video series is intended to showcase research undertaken by social workers in Wales as part of the Continuous Professional Education and Learning Programme, or CPEL. As part of the CPEL programme, you're expected to do a piece of research and for that research to relate to something that's either a hot topic in the area where you work or an area of concern in the practice area where you work. And I was wondering if you could tell me what area of research you chose and why you chose.
Yeah, the area of research was about working with parents with learning disabilities who have children in children's services. The research looks at how best to support parents with learning difficulties, what kind of things worked in the past and what kind of things haven't worked so well in the past. We can hopefully look at better ways to work and support parents with learning disabilities in the future. It's quite a relevant topic. One of the aims is obviously to try and safely reduce the lack population, give more children with families. That's in the Social Service and Wellbeing Acts, kind of ideas of co-production and that kind of thing. And 40 to 60% of parents with learning disabilities have their children in care. Within the team I work with, it's also an area we do a lot of work on. We do most of the PAMS assessments in the local authority, which are specialist assessments to work with parents with learning disabilities. And so it's an area that our team has quite a bit of input in and is a big part of our team, my team's work.
I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about what you did in terms of research and why you did it in that way in terms of methods.
I used semi-structured interviews. We completed those with social workers in the child protection teams in the council I work for. The reason why I use social workers is because they've got first-hand experience of working the day in, day out process of supporting parents with learning disabilities. We could have used the parents ourselves. It would have been maybe more interesting to have used them in some ways, but that would have created ethical dilemmas and boundaries. There'll be issues about accessing them, and we have to understand that I work for a council who may have been through proceedings with those parents. So in terms of working with social workers, that was really positive as they had really good experiences to share, but it also reduced some of those more ethical dilemmas about working, created an opportunity to work with people with the front-hand experience. Yeah,
I guess that also takes into account the fact that CPEL research projects are intended to be relatively small scale and are quite time bounded, so there's only a certain amount of time that you've got to do them.
I mean, yeah, it was a limited piece of research. I mean, it's presented in 1,500 words, so it's about being proportionate, but also about doing something that's worthwhile and meaningful. I think that gave the balance by working with social workers.
Now that you've done the research, I wondered if you could summarise very briefly what the key findings were, what were the key messages for practice from what you found?
Yeah, I think the key findings were really interesting. A lot of the research says that there's a sense of predetermination, so that social workers, when they start working with parents with learning difficulties, have already almost decided they can't do it, and so aren't giving the opportunities they would give to other parents, maybe. Actually, the research that I found was within, at least the council I worked in, I can't say more generally across the country, it hasn't got that validity because it was focused on one council. But actually they're going in with a real sense of wanting to make it work and actually putting in more resources, which is, I think, quite interesting. It almost stems from an idea that almost blame, that because someone has a learning disability, there's no blame. Yes. So you want to create opportunity because it's almost like they're a deserving person to put more effort into. That doesn't mean all of our service users aren't deserving, but I think it's that emotional response of how can I help? Is that bit heightened when someone presents as more vulnerable, maybe? So I found that quite interesting. The other things that I thought were interesting from the research in terms of what we can do differently was that there was some debate about training. A lot of the social workers felt they didn't have training around learning disabilities, but then they also really celebrated being given more specialist one-to-one input and one-to-one support around working in those fields from the team I worked in. So that was quite a good thing to highlight. And I think one of the key things that I've looked in when I wrote it up was that what is training? Is training going to a course and taking that away and having ticked a box, you've done your training certificate, or is training actually having that more tailored service to help someone develop their skill base? And actually, when you listen to what social workers are saying, they like the safety of having a training certificate, but what they really want is that one-to-one person to go to consult with, which will help them make a difference to their practice. And that was really interesting. The other thing that came about was the services, really, and the service provision for parents with learning disabilities. As regardless of anything else, without the right services moving forward, the opportunity to parent won't be there. I mean, there's a reality that if someone isn't able to meet a child's needs, we have to take neglect seriously, and we can't keep a child in an unsafe environment to be nice to someone, as sad as that might be sometimes. But what we need to bridge those gaps is obviously is services, and it's how we offer those services to parents with learning difficulties is quite an interesting thing. So the social workers I work with were actually doing some really good work. They were creating pictorial aids, creating pictorial diagrams to help with the communication difficulties, and that's definitely a strength to build on. But at the same time, a lot of the skills that even with that support, parents weren't necessarily able to implement the changes every time. And it's, I guess, quite a big question. Do you keep offering services to support someone, or when is that finite line when you withdraw those services? And I think that's a really big thing to consider. Obviously, we've got austerity and services are finite. But then when I was reading the research bit, they talked about, compared it to drug services, and actually methadone programs don't stop offering methadone because you've had a relapse. They'll say, come back and try again. For some needs, for some issues, there are constant ongoing services, but not so much in this field. So that was quite interesting. There was also other barriers, such as adult services and provision offered by them. Is quite often, as services are offered, resources are tighter, services offered reduce. But when you've got parents with learning disabilities, having the child doesn't become an extra factor for adult services. It falls to children's services, and working together might have been an option. It almost reached a point where people had stopped looking for that help from adult services or referring to adult services, because why spend an hour writing a referral when you know it's going to get knocked back? And I think that was a bit of a loss. But I do think there were some really big strengths to build on, and there were some clear barriers and hopefully paths to overcome.
As part of CPEL, you're required to share what you found with colleagues, with the local authority more widely. I was wondering if you could say a little bit about your experience of that and how your findings were received by colleagues.
Yeah, I think that was really positive. I work in quite a small team that has myself, a senior consultant social worker, and another senior practitioner in the team. So it was a really good opportunity to share the research within the team. That team also does most of the more specialised assessments with parents with learning difficulties, most of the PAMS assessments. There's normally someone from our team in most of the legal meetings. There's a really good avenue that, even though we're a small team, we work with all the other teams. So we have a lot of input in the way that they work. So for example, 2 PAMS assessments I've completed recently, worked really closely with the social worker, really closely with the support services, used some of the research that was gathered in the CPEL to influence the way I worked with those people, and we worked together on planning. By doing the PAMS assessment in a way that met the parents' needs, identified the risks, but also identified solutions, and solutions that were practical and could work and were realistic. We're able to work into scenarios where we had a court case where the children stayed with the parents at the end of those proceedings, and we had a PLO case where we've able to come off PLO, and part of the planning we've put in is how to look at more long-term support for those parents. So it's not just the here and now, it's not just a tick box that it's all okay. It's actually, well, what are we doing for the next year to plan that support in place, as that's the level of support they're going to need. So in that way, that work's really made a big difference, I think, to the families that we work with. And I know that my co-workers in the team would be looking at the same thing and have learnt from that research and looking at the same strength-based way to work with parents with learning difficulties. It doesn't mean that everyone will ultimately end up remaining as a family, but hopefully it will mean that more people will than would before, where it's safe to do so.
The Research into Practice video series. The video series is intended to showcase research undertaken by social workers in Wales as part of the Continuous Professional Education and Learning Programme, or CPEL. Research is undertaken by social workers working in both adults and children's services. The videos are intended to be short, bite-sized summaries of the research that they've undertaken and the findings from their studies.